I think a lot of the conflicts that we run into stem from this idea, which is, yes, we spell check, we grammar check, but when we talk, we don't check our words.
Welcome back to Neuroconversion Leadership, where we talk about effective leadership and communication, especially in the STEM workplace. I'm Jeremy Doran, and I help great engineers become great leaders. Today, we have a very special guest, Becky Schmooke. She is a speaker, a leadership coach, and an author. Becky, welcome.
Thank you very much, Jeremy. I'm glad to be here.
We are very happy to have you here. I gave a very brief description of what you do. Can you go into a little bit more detail of who are the types of people that you tend to work with?
Absolutely. And I have to say, my kids they tell me, they're like, Mom, I hate it when somebody asks me what you do. Because they're like, I don't know what to say. And I was like, you know what? I don't either half the time. But the people I work with, it runs the gamut. I do work with the NFL, speaking to their players on leadership development. I do a lot of stuff with healthcare, especially with looking more like surgeons and doctors and really helping them redefine leadership, challenging the norms of which they grew up with, went to school learning, and have seen in practice. And then, we hit the corporate side and first responders. So really just about everyone and anyone. And then also kids as well.
Yep, that pretty much
hits it all.
I'm particularly interested in medical people because, as you know, we talk about the STEM fields here and the way people like engineers, doctors, the way they tend to have grown up communicating don't necessarily translate all that well into leadership roles. I'm interested in what observations you've had there.
Yeah, I think one issue I see a lot in healthcare is that hierarchy getting in the way of communication. And what I mean by that is just let's take a surgeon, for example. Their words hit differently, and they don't necessarily realize that. That because they have authority and power, and just again, this we've grown up looking at surgeons as higher up on that scale, their words hit different. And so therefore they need to be more mindful of how they say things, what they're saying, and making sure to take a moment and watch for nonverbals, because it's really easy to assume that somebody's upset at you because they are stressed out, and they come across that tone. So that's one thing with communication I work a lot of, slowing down and let's take a moment to change how we're talking.
It's interesting. I was reading some of what you sent me about checking your words. And two things that hit me are when I was growing up, I spent a lot of time paying attention to body language because to me, the words people said didn't make sense. They weren't saying what they actually meant. And I had to spend a lot of effort trying to understand. To me, it was like I always say, it was like everybody had a code book and I didn't have the code book. So when they were talking, they all knew what each other meant, but not me. So I always paid a lot of attention to body language. And then conversely, as an adult, I don't give a lot of body language and I'm not very expressive in my face. So I've had people tell me, when you're saying something important, I want you to hold up a sign so that I know, because it's important in your mind, but the importance doesn't come across. I'm like, well, the words I'm saying express the importance. They're like, yeah, unless you wave your hands, we don't get it. So, I've struggled on both ends of that. And I'm interested in you responding to that with the things that I read from what you sent me.
First of all, I think it's fascinating that you grew up studying body language, and then but you yourself don't express that. That's so cool. I don't know. I think that's interesting. I would have guessed it would have gone the other way, that you would have been more intentional with your body language.
Well, it was intentional growing up. I'm the youngest of 10 children, and giving away any sort of emotional information was just a weapon that they could use against me. So I learned early on not to express what my emotions are.
Oh my God, that's a lot of, that's a lot of kids. Okay, I'm excited to learn more about you. All right, word check. I'm going to answer your question, I promise. I'm good at I do write about this and I talk about this a lot because I think a lot of the conflicts that we run into stem from this idea, which is, yes, we spell check, we grammar check, but when we talk, we don't check our words. And too often we speak in judgment words and not in fact. And then on the other side, we hear judgment, we hear story instead of the words actually being spoken. And we respond to that story and not the actual words. And that's where we get into trouble. I always say like a question about a dishwasher from a partner rarely stays on the topic of the dishwasher. If my husband asks like, hey, did you get the dishwasher unloaded? All I have to do is say yes or no. I promise you though that I'm more likely to answer about how busy my day was if I didn't get to it, right? And try to justify that. But we don't have to. We just have to say yes or no to things. And then on the how we talk and how we speak, we use these judgment words and they're not helpful. And I hear a lot of someone saying, describing an employee as being lazy. That's a judgment word. What you consider lazy might be completely different than what I consider lazy. And instead, I asked them, well, what does that mean? Like, what are they doing? And they gave me the whole long list. You can do something with that list. You can't do anything with just the word lazy. So the concept of word check is this idea of, are we talking in facts? Are we talking judgment words? Are we hearing facts, the actual words being said? Or are we hearing the story?
I just want to make sure I understand. When you say judgment words, is that implying that I'm saying a word and judging you from that word, or that it's open to interpretation? Which way do you mean judgment?
More the latter. So more the idea, so like lazy, rude, dismissive, those things that we interpret in different ways. That was a good, I've never had that question before. That was a good one. And you did put your hand up, so I knew it was important, so I listened.
Yep. I love words. When a word could mean two different things, it's kind of exciting for me, so I always want to make sure I understand.
That's fantastic. So to your point, though, of reading the nonverbals, I think it is so important to read those, especially as a leader, because we have to be willing to adapt. And I use an example of, if you have to have a difficult conversation with somebody, let's say you're a manager, you have to call a direct report in. And it's going to be one of, coming down on them perhaps about something. And it's not going to be a great job. You're killing a type of conversation. And they walk in and you can just tell something's up. Their shoulders are slumped, right? They look like somebody like ran over their puppy. You have to be willing as a leader to take that information in and adjust and adapt to that, right? So checking that, I always say, check the story. You can say, hey, I just want to take a moment and check in. This is what I'm seeing. The same as saying, this is what I've heard. This is what I'm hearing. This is what I'm interpreting. And taking that little beat to fact check can save us so much time and energy.
When I'm giving newer managers advice on how to have one of those difficult conversations, I say, I want you to simply state the actual facts. You're not going to tell the person you're always late. It's on this day you were late by this many minutes, on that day you were late by so many minutes, and then just stop and ask them, tell me about that. Because that way you haven't made any sort of, judgment on them, and you're giving them a chance to tell you if those facts are correct, and if they are correct, if there's a reason behind them. But it's so easy to just go in, why are you always late? And then just kind of launch on them. But if you let them talk, a lot of times you'll find new information.
I love that. And I have a question for you. Do you find too that when you do that, when you list out the facts, sometimes you realize that something's not nearly as big of a deal as you thought it was. And you realize you kind of see the, the evidence of your case and you're like, oh, this is not a strong one. This is not a strong case here. I better not bring it to trial on this. And I think that helps. It puts things in perspective because we do catastrophize things and we do go to those absolutes all the time. I mean, I do that. I just said all the time. We don't do it all the time. That's right there. Right there, I did that. So I love that advice you give.
One phrase that I like to say is most things in moderation. I'm like, you can't have all things in moderation. That already defies the moderation. That's terrible. So most things in moderation.
Brilliant. Very good. I have a question for you. Do you still watch nonverbals as closely as you did growing up?
I do. And I think part of it is just habit. And, I am somewhere on the neurodivergent scale. So people don't always necessarily make sense to me automatically. So I've learned that paying attention helps me avoid miscommunication a lot. And I think that more people should stop assuming that they understand what other people mean and that they understand what you meant.
I just ask because nonverbals, I love them. I watch for them, but I also know that I get them wrong a lot because I had one time it happened where I thought somebody in the audience when I was giving a keynote wasn't paying attention. They could tell they're on their phone, and I used to have a really bad habit of looking for those nonverbals. Because it is important to know, like, okay, are they with you or not? And I would hyper focus on the one person who wasn't giving me what I thought were good nonverbals. And I went up to one person afterwards, and it was somebody who was on their phone. I did not think they were paying attention, and they were in this group, and they did say, they're like, hey, I loved your talk, all that. And I decided to fact check my interpretation of the nonverbals. And I was like, oh, that's good to hear. I said, honestly, I didn't think you were paying attention because you were on your phone the whole time. And that's when he informed me that he was taking notes on his phone. He's like, yeah, I forgot paper. I was taking notes on my phone. I was like, oh, cool. Wow. I could not have, I was like, I loved it because I got to demonstrate in action, right? This idea of word check. And then I also really enjoyed the humbling of, taking my own medicine, of realizing, look at that. Look how wrong I was. And I had spent a lot of energy and time focused on that, even in my head while I was giving my talk, instead of giving my all to what I was there to do.
You actually bothered to ask. So I will, if I'm not sure and I think that you are mad at something I said, I will double check, and often they're not. But I think because I grew up not always understanding people, I am more okay with asking. Very few people will stop and bother to ask if they interpreted it correctly.
And that's why I also, on the communication side, encourage people in a family, in a workplace, to have some common language around kind of our emotional state, and be more mindful of that so people understand. So if I tell you, I use simmer and boil. So the idea of simmer, and I think a lot of us walk around at a simmer. And if you're at a simmer, it doesn't take a lot to get to a boil. And so it might seem like an overreaction to somebody else, to the person experiencing it, makes total sense because they were already at a simmer. And if we can communicate that, if I told you, Jeremy, was like, hey, just a heads up, like, I'm at a simmer already. And then you ask me something and I have a little bit of an edge to my response, you're not going to interpret that as being about you, because you're like, okay, I know Becky's at a simmer, not going to take it personally. It just makes things easier. I like to make things easier. Life's hard enough.
It sure is. On a podcast fairly recently, we were talking about small talk. Mm-hmm. And I don't love small talk. It's small. I think that it's pointless. But one thing that we got to was the fact that small talk lets you take the temperature of the other person. So if the example you gave earlier, you're about to have a difficult conversation and you find out through small talk that they're already at least at a simmer, you might handle that a little bit differently. Yeah. Because, I'm not the center of the universe, even though it feels like I am to me. But I've had times when a friend of mine walked by me on the street and I waved hi, and he basically just ignored me. And I'm like, ooh, what did I do that made him so mad? He's like, oh, no, I was rehearsing my talk in my head. I didn't even see you. Mm-hmm. Glad I asked, because otherwise that would have sat with me for days of wondering what I did. And I can find things that I did that might have pissed him off. Turns out none of them did.
That's when you accidentally admit to things that you didn't mean to.
Right.
But this idea, again, of stating where we're at requires us, though, to calibrate, to know where we're at. And to be mindful, too, of those nonverbals. So I know that if I have a migraine, I'm going to come across a certain way. So I will work harder to, if I have to give a talk, I'm going to dig deeper. I'm going to be more mindful of that. Same with if I'm tired or if I'm in a bad mood already. I take it upon myself to take responsibility of my nonverbals. So to make sure I walk through with a smile and show up differently.
So when you are going into a important conversation, do you have a checklist of like checking in on yourself? And then if you find out that you're in a bad mood, what are some steps you can take to overcome that?
Yeah, so I kind of refer to it as a Swiss cheese test. What I mean by it is I heard a story about a chef who would always have his the other chefs in the kitchen eat up a cube of Swiss cheese before their dinner shift began, because Swiss cheese, the salt content, it's pretty much always the same across the board. And so they would eat some cheese, and if the cheese tasted saltier to them, then they understand it's a way to calibrate their palate. So they could then make adjustments. If it tasted more bland, then they knew, that information. So as they were cooking, they could make those adjustments, knowing where they're at. So we need to be better at calibrating. So to kind of figure out like, well, what's the equivalent of my bite of Swiss cheese? So it could be listening to a song. So there's certain songs I listen to before I give a talk, and I know how I respond to those songs when I'm in that right mindset. And so if I'm listening to that song and I'm not feeling the same way as I know I should, that gives me important information. And same with just over time, it becomes habit. And this idea of simmer versus boil, I know exactly what a simmer feels like. Everything has a little bit of an edge to it. If my kids say like, Mom, I don't expect them to be saying, Mom, I love you. It's like, Mom, I need this. My default is to think negative. And so once you kind of get that practice of calibrating, of checking in with yourself, then yes, you need to figure out how to change the temperature. So it might be, I would say like, you got to find, what does your ice look like? If we're going with the idea of simmer versus boil, what does it look like to throw some ice in the mix? And we often think of triggers as negative, but I think there's really good positive triggers too, and using those to act as your ice. So maybe it's a song, maybe it's a YouTube clip, maybe it's a photo, a smell, going outside and just like exhaling. Maybe that's it. But I'll ask you, like for you, do you know like what's something that helps you recenter and stay grounded?
I tend to be pretty level anyway, but taking deep breaths goes a long way. It's kind of connecting your autonomic system with your conscious systems and kind of helping things balance out. Just a quick story. You're talking about chefs calibrating their palate. I was at dinner one time and the food was so over the top spicy. And everyone's comment was, the chef must have gotten into a fight with his wife today because holy moly, is that hot.
That was funny.
The other thing that lets me know that I'm down is I have a much harder time making a decision about anything, like whether I'm going to, go to one store or the other. If I'm feeling down, I have a really hard time making that decision. And if I find myself not making decisions, I'm like, ooh, I didn't realize I was down, but now that I stop and think about it, I am.
Fascinating. Yeah. I think it gives us also a little bit more grace, or forces some more grace into our lives when we know that. I know one day, I guess a couple years ago now, I'm a type 1 diabetic, and I had a long, long night of nonstop just low blood sugars, and I got maybe an hour of sleep, if that. And so I knew going into the day I was tired. And I took a moment to just tell myself that, literally outside. I said it out loud to myself. I said, Becky, like, you are tired today. So remember, you are going to be more tempted to struggle with those obstacles that pop up. You're going to have a hard time regulating emotions. Like, I just gave myself that talking to, not to set myself up to therefore like have a harder time, but just that grounding reminder of, if you find yourself struggling today, don't be surprised. And not even 30 minutes later, I was walking from the upstairs of the house down to the basement, where the whole lower level is my business. I have a commercial teaching kitchen there and a workshop room. And I was walking into the kitchen and I heard the sound of running water. And we've had a lot of plumbing issues since we built this place. And I've learned that you don't want to hear running water when you do not want to hear running water. Like if you didn't have a faucet on intentionally, that's not good. And I walked into the dish room and it was flooding. And it was a case where I just like immediately was like, that like dread of, oh no. And I remember trying to like get the water turned off and it wasn't, the main valve wasn't turning. And I just felt myself starting to cry. And I was like, what is going on? And I just had that I'll never forget this like moment where that voice came back and like, remember, Becky, you are tired. And so you're not going to be your best self. And that gave me the permission to be a hot mess and not worry about being a hot mess. I didn't try to fix it. I just allowed myself to. I was like standing in the flooded room trying to fix the water. That was freeing. And so I think we need to give ourselves that grace of if you go into work and you know you're having a hard day. If you can tell other people that, fantastic. But if you can at least tell yourself that, it just takes a lot off our shoulders.
And it's amazing how much we compound our problems by getting mad at ourselves for having a problem. Like,
yeah, we're really good at that.
Mad at myself for being mad over this thing. Nope, just accept that you are.
Mm-hmm.
And the other thing that I think people who are having a hard time with something, they refuse to just take a step back. I've worked with people who are just frustrated over something like a spreadsheet. And I'm like, walk away for 2 minutes. They're like, I'm not walking away until I finish this thing. I'm like, I guarantee you, if you walk away, you'll finish it much faster. And they fight it. And then I finally get them to walk away. 2 minutes later, they're like, I know how to fix it. Like, yes, just be willing to take a break.
And that's where, like, I say, like, if you identify that you're at a simmer, it's then on you to do something about it, to walk away from it. You can't just say I'm at a simmer and then continue forward and do nothing and then are excused from, what happens when that turns into a boil. And I write about that in my book of a time where I spent all day trying to like mending the fence and the goats kept getting out and I was trying to protect an apple. We thought it was smart to, actually, this is me. I thought it was smart to plant an apple tree inside the goat pasture because in my head I was like, yes, we'll just protect it for a little bit and then it's going to get big and then the apples will fall and then the goats can eat the apples. Like, it's brilliant, except for the fact that like apple trees take a while to grow to full trees. And goats are mischievous as can be. And so not only were they getting out of the main fencing of the pasture, but then getting into the tree. I'm trying to protect the tree. It was 8 hours of being outsmarted by goats. And it's very humbling and very frustrating. And my girls, the bus pulls up, they get the bus, and I tell them, like, hey, I told them I'm at a simmer. And I was like, here are the things you need to get done. You go inside, I'm still battling, this fence project. And I didn't take the time to cool down. And instead, I just like that Excel sheet with that employee, I was like, I'm going to stick at it. I'm going to get this done. And that simmer just got closer and closer to a boil to the point that when I did walk inside the house and I saw that the girls had not done all the chores, that's all I needed to go into a full-on boil. And for me, when I'm at a boil, I'm yelling, I'm using shaming words. I take my values, I set them loose, and I'm like, see you later, guys. We're off. And the problem is like often again, when we're at a boil, we know we're there. We know what we're saying isn't good, and we know that we're going to have to deal with the consequences of it. And we don't want to do that. That's scary. And so that's why you see people double down and they stay angry, because being angry feels a lot safer than being vulnerable and owning the consequences. And it was just though a time where I did catch myself and I was like, okay, another opportunity to do things differently. And I told the girls I was putting myself in timeout, and I went in my room, took a shower. And I think all parents love going to timeout, by the way. It's the best. I would love to feel like
not a penalty.
No, it's not. But and then I just kind of did a debrief. I realized like the mistake was, staying with it and not stepping away. And then I, came out and brought the girls down, owned it, apologized. The night moved on. They forgave me, and of course I still had mom guilt, but I didn't have shame. I think there's an important difference in that.
Nice. I like that. For me, I told you that I'm not particularly expressive. And the more emotionally challenged I am, the less I actually express. I do improv, and we were doing some scene, and his feedback was, react the way you would in real life. I'm like, oh, I would react way less in real life than I'm doing here. And I've got some friends who were making fun of me because I was getting upset about something. They're like, ooh, your eyebrow twitched. You must be really, really mad. I'm like, yes, I am.
That is, you must be really good at poker.
I do love poker. So I try now to be more expressive. Some of it's from watching myself on the podcast. When I go back and edit, I'm like, holy cow, do I look either annoyed or disinterested when it was anything but that? I was just listening. So I'm like, I really need to work on
I have a question for you, which is why, I guess, what about leadership excites you the most? Like, why do you continue to show up and put in the time for this podcast, put in the time for everything you do? Like, what about it drives you?
So it's two things. Leadership, I think, is such an amazing thing. The way I describe it is people got promoted because they were so good at the job that they'd spent 20,000 hours learning to do well. And then all of a sudden, they're given an entirely new set of things that they need to do, and people don't really teach them at most companies. And so getting them to make the mental shift that's needed and then start being effective just makes their life and everyone around them, their world, just so much better. And the communication part of it is, my degrees are mechanical engineering with a minor in psychology. And I particularly love working with engineers who have become managers, because all the skills that they've developed over their life are great for engineering. They're not necessarily the skills that help them be a great communicator and or leader. And I get excited about helping people who are going through the same struggle that I've gone through.
It's a very good reason. I'll allow it. That works.
Thank you.
That works. So for you, what is the most important message you like to give people, as they do transition? Let's say I was really good at my job and I was going to be promoted into that management role because of that reason, right? It has nothing to do, like, I'm actually a horrible leader, right? I know nothing about those people skills. I'm just really darn good at my job. What's your advice to somebody in that position if they're given that opportunity to move up into management? And if they know they don't have those management skills, like, is there a time where it's better to not move up and to stay where you're at?
The skills can be developed. So if the person is interested in developing those skills and they're aware that they may be lacking in some of them, then I think it's a great thing to move up. If they have not done any self-reflection and they just see it as this is the next thing, and they really don't like that part of it, then no, they should find a way to move up, staying in the technical field. But people can make the transition, and a lot of it is a mindset. So the two things that I'll say to new managers are, you have to change what makes you proud. You used to be proud by delivering a product or a drawing or whatever it is. And what you take pride in now is having a team that gets a lot of things done. So you have to take pride in other people's work, and it's a really hard mental shift for people to make. But once they do, then they start focusing more on the leadership part of it.
That's a really good point on that, being able to make that mental shift. And I think that's where also I feel I would like to see companies in general do things differently when it comes to providing that leadership training.
Mm-hmm.
I think if you're providing it just to management, it's too late. Sometimes if you can provide it to everybody, you get to identify then who really latches onto it, who really likes it, who's really into it. And you also can see if there's somebody that in your head you're like wanting to promote them, and then you get a better sense ahead of time, right? Do they need more training or not before that moment? Because I feel bad. I think a lot of people are promoted into management and they're set up to fail because they weren't given a chance to become a leader before that moment, and they're expected to take on this new role, all these things, plus do all this leadership training all at the same time. And that's a lot for anyone, and especially in today's society. We're so busy. That's just where we're at. I don't think people have the bandwidth always for it.
Another saying that I use is management is getting people to do things. and leadership is getting people to want to do things. There are a lot of people who are very good leaders before they're ever managers, and they develop the skills of actually leading and getting people to want to do a certain thing. If you're a manager and you're falling back on basically because I told you to, you lose your authority every time that you force the issue because you have authority.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I think when we were chatting before, I brought up too, there's that movie, The Breakup, with Vince Vaughn and Kate Hudson, and they have I think it's the two of them, they have a fight about the dishwasher, back to the dishwasher, and, she says to him, like, I want you to want to unload the dishwasher, or want to do the dishes, I think was, and there is that element of, like a leader gets somebody to see the why. So they would want to do the dishes because they want to be part of this partnership. They want to be helpful. They see that it's more than just dishes. That's the goal. That's everyone's goal.
I like it.
To find somebody who wants to do our dishes.
Yes. So you find that person. Let me know.
Yeah.
So sadly, we need to start wrapping up. I need to be respectful of people's times.
Absolutely.
Before I ask you my 3 standard questions, tell us all the name of your book and how people can reach out to get in touch with you.
Oh, good call. Yes, my book is called Choose the Handle That Holds, and it's a guide to living, leading, and owning the moments that matter. So it really redefines leadership. It's very action-based, very short chapter, so it's a quick read, and you can kind of jump all around. So it's nice for those who just don't have the time to sit and read a book from front to back. And they can find out more by, or just type in Choose the Handle That Holds, and I'll pop on up. And I write on social media almost every day on all the platforms, and there's videos of our baby goats as well. So if you like baby goats, you can find those there.
Nice. I will look for that. Okay.
That's how I lure people there. I'm like, it's like the white van with the puppies and the guy with the baby goats. Like, just come.
Do you want some cookies?
Yeah, exactly.
So, Becky, what is a place that you have traveled to and loved, and a place you have not yet been but want to go?
Okay. I'm a huge fan of Ireland. Like behind me, that's a photo up there. And I love the weather of Ireland because I do. I like the cool. I don't mind some rain. I like the green. It just makes me happy. And the accent's great, as you actually agreed to as well. Place I want to go, I have never been to Italy. It's been on my list, and I don't know when I'm going to get there, but it's where I want to go.
So I lived in Italy for a year, and I traveled to Ireland a fair amount while I was there. And one day in Milan, it was just misting. Every single person had on a nice raincoat and an umbrella. I land in Ireland, and it is pouring rain, not an umbrella or raincoat to be found anywhere. Just people with a cap and a wool sweater, and that was it. So,
that's all you need. That's so funny. Oh, that's great.
When you get there, let me know.
I will.
Who do you think is a great communicator?
Okay. I was thinking about this, and it's somebody that maybe this is like one of the worst answers I can give because no one's going to know this person.
That's
fine. But my 9-year-old is a fantastic communicator. She is so good at all sorts of communications. Like she had a laundry basket by the stairs the other day, and I came in from outside, and she had left a sticky note on top of it saying these are dirty. I'm going to wash them. I had to go do something else. So she plans ahead expecting that I'm going to come in and see this and ask that question. So she's really good at anticipating what questions someone might have. And then she's really good also of just giving feedback and communicating feedback, and not always what you want to hear, right? It's what you need to hear. So she'll pull me aside and say, Mom, the tone you just used made it really hard for me to hear your words. And then another time she'll say hey, I really like the way you asked me that because it didn't make me feel like I was in trouble. So that's what I really appreciate in communication. It's just people I think over communication is the direction you need to go, because the consequence of that is people might be annoyed, but the consequence of under communicating, those consequences are massive.
That is a very self-aware child you have.
She is, I always say, she's a combination of the Dalai Lama and Chris Farley. It's a great combination to have. It works well.
That's interesting. That's a good one. All right. And then the last question is, what is one piece of communication advice we can all benefit from?
Word check. just start paying attention. It's so fun when you realize just how often we respond to the story and not the actual words. And then just check it. Just be able to tell someone, hey, the story I'm telling myself is this is what you meant to say. And if they say, no, I did not mean that at all, no, I'm not mad at you, then it's your choice to believe them or not. And I'm just going to recommend you do, because life's a lot easier that way.
My advice to people when someone will say something like, I don't know if that was a compliment or an insult, I'm like, always assume it's a compliment, whether it was or not. It just makes your life better.
So true. Oh,
You make your life easier.
It really does. Man, this has been great. Thank you so much, Jeremy. I appreciate you.
Thank you so much for listening to Neuroconversant Leadership. If you found this beneficial, can you do me one small favor? It'll be quick, I promise. Can you go and give this podcast a review on Apple or Spotify or wherever it is that you listen before doing anything else? Unless you're driving. If you're driving, then I need you to keep driving. And then when you're done and parked, then go ahead and give me a review. Hopefully 5 stars, but whatever you are comfortable honestly giving. Thank you and have a great day.